Hello everyone. In this video we'll learn about graphing sine and cosine functions, and we can call them periodic functions because this function has a regular repeating pattern over a constant interval. Now if I'm talking about, let's say, sine function, this is my pattern and it will get repeated over and over, and the same thing on the other side. Okay, same, and so on. So each one of these colors from here to here is a period. From here to here we call it a period. So a period is the length of one cycle. Now there is something called an axis, equation of the axis, and that's going to be y equal the maximum plus the minimum over 2. Finally we have the amplitude, which is the vertical distance between the maximum and the minimum. So if we're talking about sine function and cosine function here, that's the parent function, sine function, and one period basically is the one from here all the way to here. The length of this period is 2 pi. Okay, that's because it's a, again, parent function. So the length of the period, we call it t, the period called t, uppercase, is 2 pi. Now where's the amplitude? The amplitude, we call it uppercase A, and it has to be a positive number, so we take an absolute value for that one, is the distance between the maximum point and this line here. This line here in this case is y equals 0. That's my axis. That's the line in which it divides the period into two equal parts. So this is the first section and this is the second one, okay? Now, one more thing, so that's the period, that's the amplitude, and yes. Same when we are talking about cosine function. The one period, it looks like this. This is my maximum point, that's maximum, and this is my minimum. The distance between the maximum and the line here, y equal x, y equals 0, is basically equal to the distance from the minimum point all the way to the axis. Period is between here all the way to here, and it gets repeated. So it gets repeated over the period. The domain for any for sine and cosine is all real numbers because it keeps repeating over and over and over. So if you continue, keep repeating, and same here, same with the cosine as well. So the domain for both functions is basically all real numbers. What about the range? The range basically is going to be from this point all the way to this point, which is usually from -1 to 1. That's for a parent function, or we can say from the minimum to the maximum. Now we will learn how to draw the function. In order to draw the function, we need to remember this form. It does not matter whether it's sine and cosine, it's the same. So what are these things represent? So a, as a uppercase, multiply the function, and whatever inside the function b, it will be taken as a common factor, x minus h plus k. Let's look at each one of these. First of all, a basically represents the amplitude when you take it as an uppercase a. Then we do have the equation of the axis, and equation of the axis is y equal k. And then we have something called phase shift, and phase shift is basically the horizontal shift. So it's either right or left, and that's basically represent the h. Then we have the period, which is going to be 2 pi over b. That's something you need to know, because usually the period of the parent function is 2 pi, but sometimes we shrink, compress, stretch, and all of these factors. So how do we find it? 2 pi over b. Finally, and then we have something called skip count. So we'll skip count by the t, the period, over 4. And finally, we will create a table of 5 angles. So that's going to be y, and that's going to be sine, or whatever function we have. Let's say x and fx, and we need 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 angles, minimum of 5 angles. It's very important here. I will add something here. I will add from this point, I will add the maximum and the minimum point. I need to know what are the maximum and minimum. So the maximum is basically the axis, which is k plus the amplitude, and the minimum will be k minus the amplitude. That's something that I need to add here. The maximum is k plus the amplitude, minimum is k minus the amplitude. We are going to use these 6 steps, including these 2, to draw any sine and cosine function, okay? So let's move into this function here. 3 sine 2x minus pi plus 1. How we are going to draw this function? Well, first of all, I need to rewrite it. So it's going to be 3 sine. I need to take 2 as a common factor. So I'm going to take 2 as a common factor. By taking 2 as a common factor, you divide this and this by 2. It's going to be x minus pi over 2. Over 2 plus 1. Now, by doing this, we know that number 1, amplitude equal to the absolute value of 3, which is equal to 3. That's the amplitude. Number 2, we need to find what? The equation of the axis. Equation of the axis. And equation of the axis is going to be basically y equal k. K in this case is 1. That's number 2. So this is 1, this is 2. Number 3, we need to find from here we need to find the maximum and the minimum. And let's say, what is the maximum? Maximum point is going to be the k plus the amplitude, which is 1 plus 3, which is 4. And here the k minus the amplitude, which is equal negative 2. So the maximum point will be 4, the minimum will be negative 2. Then we will move into the phase shift. Phase shift is basically h. And h in this case is pi over 2. Remember, when we take h, we change the sign. Then we need to find the period, which is t equal 2 pi over b. That's equal to 2 pi over, the b is 2, right? Which is equal pi. So when every pi, the function will repeat itself. Then we have number 5 is basically the skip count. So I'm going to move all of this up, okay? Now I'm back, so I need to draw now the table. And the table, basically, when you draw it, you need 5 angles. So I'm going to put here 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here is x, and here is y. What angles I'm going to take? Well, basically, listen to this now. The first angle is going to be my phase shift. So what is my phase shift? Is pi over 2. That's going to be my first angle here. So choosing the first angle, pi over 2. Next, the second angle will be adding the skip count, which is this point here, every time. So I'm going to add pi over 4 each time. So by doing this, I'm going to add pi over 4 each time, okay? So from where did I get pi over 4? From the skip count. So your skip count by pi over 4. Again, you start from the phase shift and you skip count by pi over 4 in this case. So by skip count by pi over 4, we are going to get 3 pi over 4. I'm going to get pi. I'm going to get 5 pi over 4. And finally, I'm going to get 3 pi over 4. Now, just fixing this. Now, what about the results? Should I go here to the original equation and substitute x pi over 2, 3 pi over 4? You can do that, but there is an easier way. Let's recall the shape of the parent function sine x. by looking at the parent function sine x, let's draw it. So it's going to be this one from here all the way to here. Let's remember these points. This is 1, this is 2, 3, 4, and 5. These are my 5 angles here, guys. Okay? But these numbers will be changed based on the function, based on the transformations. Now, what are these numbers? Usually, this is 0, then pi over 2, then pi, then 2 pi over 2, then 3 pi over 2, then 2 pi. How did we get that? If you remember the quadrants, if I have an angle here, that's going to be my angle 0. Then this angle will be moved. So the terminal side, that's 0. The terminal side will be moved all the way maybe here. That's my second angle, which is 90 degree pi over 2. So that's 0, then pi over 2. Okay, next I have, imagine that this angle will continue moving, so that it's going to come here. So that's pi. So this is pi. Then the angle will all again move into here. That's going to be 3 pi over 2, 270. So that's going to be here, this point here is a 3 pi over 2. Finally, the angle will go back in its original place, which is 2 pi. The 360 goes one full rotation. So this is going to go back into 2 pi. So that's why the length of a period for the parent function is 2 pi. Now, by thinking about all of these things, let's go back and think about how we are going to find these values here. Okay, let me go back again and draw one more time the parent function sine x. By drawing the parent function sine x here, what did I notice? One more time. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The angles has been divided into 3 categories. Either one in the maximum, which is in this case 1, or the minimum, which is -1, or these 3, this one, this one, this one, are on the axis y equals 0. So basically, the sine of 0 is 0, sine of pi over 2 is 1, sine of pi is 0, sine of 3 pi over 2 is -1, and sine of 2 pi is 0. So my answer is going to be between 1, -1, and 0. Now 1 is basically my maximum, -1 is minimum, 0 is my axis. Okay, now how do we do, what we should do with this pattern? Let's look at the pattern again. Okay, the ones on the axis, I'm going to make it red. So 1, 2, 3, and red. The maximum is blue, and the minimum is green. Now let's look at the pattern. We started from the axis, so we are going to start from the axis here. The axis, and next step will be maximum, and then again axis, and then minimum, and again axis. So one more time, the pattern is axis, max, axis, minimum, axis. We are going to follow this pattern every time we have sine x. So now let's look at my axis and minimum and maximum points that I found earlier. So here we do have axis is at 1, y equal 1 from here. Minimum is which point? -2. Maximum is 4. So I know by default that these points are going to be axis is 1, again here 1, and here 1. And then we do have maximum, which is 4, and which is minimum, which is -2. Now let's draw this. So when I draw, I'm going to go here and follow. So I have this graph here. So let's say that this is going to be my points, my angles. You can skip count, you can keep it. Let's say that this is pi over 2 because pi over 2 is positive. So this side is the positive, this side is the negative. That's my pi over 2. I cannot write the angle, but you can write it. because of the pen. So this is pi over 2, and then 3 pi over 4, and then pi, 5 pi over 4, and 3 pi over 4. These are my 5 angles. We are not using this, okay, because there is a shift. So we are using these 5 angles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, let me find my maximum. My axis is at 1, so here's 1. So this is going to be my axis. Okay, that's going to be my axis. You don't need to draw it. You can. I like to draw it though. It's up to you. Minimum is -2, so we go here all the way down, -2. Maximum is 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4 is here. You need to count. And then we start drawing. So pi over 2 is this point here. Pi over 2 go with 1, so the axis. So this is my point. Then 3 pi over 4, which is the next one, will go with 4. Then we have pi with 1, 5 pi over 4 with -2, and 3 pi over 4 with the 1. And then I match between them. So I'm going to match now, and it has to be a curve. Okay, you can make it better. Here we go. Now this is one cycle. What about if you want to draw more cycles? Well, if you want to draw more cycles, what you are going to do, if you want to draw more cycles to the right, you will continue by drawing another 5 points. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again, skip count by pi over 4. So you skip count by pi over 4 each time to create the list, and then you draw it. But I know the pattern. So if I want to draw it without this, I could say that the next one will go up. So it's 1, and then that's 1, sorry. And then next is going to be 4, and then again 1. Then again, I'm following the same pattern here, okay, guys? So 1, 4, 1, -2, and 1. And I draw the second cycle. And you can continue the same. What about the left side? Well, if you want the left side, you will take it from the left side. You subtract pi over 4 because you are going backward. But again, I can do it without that by taking this. So I have 1. So I'm going, guys, backward, okay? 1, then -2, then 1, then 4, and then again 1. And then I match between these points, okay? And you can continue. You can do, let me do one more period. It's 1, and then -2, and then 1, and then 4, and then again 1. And then I can match. So here we draw how many patterns? 1, 2, 3, 4. We draw 4 periods. Let's talk about the domain. So the domain, we know it's all real numbers for any periodic function, sine and cosine. I'm talking about sine and cosine here. And what about the range? The range is going to be the minimum, comma max. So minimum was -2, maximum is 4. So the period was between this and this point. Now let's try this function here. I'm going to follow the same steps. So first of all, I'm going to rewrite the function to make it easy for me to find the amplitude, the phase shift, and all of these things. So first of all, this one should be coming to this side because this is a k, okay? Now let's write the function. So y equal -2 sine, and then what is the coefficient of x over 2? It's basically 1/2 x. So 1/2 is going to be my b. So I'm going to say 1/2, and then dividing everything by 1/2. So that's going to be x plus pi and plus 1. So by doing this, we can tell what is the amplitude, what is the phase shift, and the period, and all of these things. So let's try. So here, the amplitude is basically the absolute value of -2, which is 2. So remember, the amplitude always going to be positive. And then number 2, the axis. It's going to be y equal k, which is 1. From there, we can tell the max and the minimum. So the maximum is going to be what? It's going to be the k plus the amplitude, which is 1 plus 2, that's 3. Minimum will be k minus the amplitude, which is -1. Now next we have the phase shift, which is h. So h equal, we said it's pi, because when you take 1/2 as a common factor again, plus pi. So pi, negative pi, I'm sorry. Negative pi, we change the sign, remember? Number 4, we're talking about the period, which is going to be t, and that's going to be 2 pi over b, and that's 1/2. And the answer will be 4 pi. Then we need to divide this by 4. So it's going to be 4 pi over 4, and that's pi. And now we create the table. Number 6 is my table. So again, I'm taking the first 5, and then you can build the rest without mentioning the angles. So I need 5 points. You always start from the phase shift, which is -pi, starting from there. And then I'm going to add the amplitude, the skip count each time. So I'm adding pi each time. That's going to be 0. And then add pi, and then add another pi, 2 pi, add pi, 3 pi. And now how we are going to choose the y? Well, in this case, it's not sine. It's negative sine. Negative sine is this function here. Negative sine is the reflection over x-axis, so it's going to be this one here. So by drawing that, we know that this is my function. That's negative sine. It's not sine, because I do have negative. So which points we are going to use? Axis, minimum, axis, maximum, axis, maximum and axis. So I'm going to start with axis, then instead of max we'll go with minimum, and then axis, max, and axis. So one more time, axis, axis, axis. Here in between the minimum, maximum. If it is sine, will be maximum, minimum. And now we can decide the angles. So the axis is basically we are using 1, 2, and 3, these 3 points. So axis is 1, 1, 1. Minimum is -1. Maximum is 3. We're going to go here and draw these. So let's do it. So I'm starting with -pi. -pi is basically on the negative side here. So I'm going to take this -pi. -pi, then 0, then pi, then 2 pi, then 3 pi. See? I'm going to take these 5 points. And this is going to be my period, and then we can continue to the right and left. So where's my axis? Is at 1. So I have this, let me make these smaller. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now that's 1. That's 1. Again, you don't need to draw it. I like to draw it myself, but it's up to you. -1 is going to be this point here, -1. Again, sometimes I cannot draw it because of my space, but you need to write -1, okay? And then I have 3. 1, 2, 3, it's here. That's 3. Okay, now let's do it. So we start with -pi and 1, 0 and -1, pi and 1, 2 pi and 3, I'm going to erase this. And finally, the axis. And you match between them. And again, if you want to continue, you go ahead. So one more time, 1, and then 1, negative 1, 1, 3, 1. So 1, negative 1, 1, and then 3, and 1 again, and you match. And you can do the same on the other side. So, but we go backward. 1, and 3, 1, negative 1, and 1, and you match. And you can continue from both sides. Now domain, we know it's all real numbers. Range is going to be from the minimum, which is negative 1, all the way to maximum. That's how to draw a sine function. And now we are going to move to draw the cosine function. And it's going to be the same thing actually. Let's look at this function here. Following the same steps, we are going to rewrite y. So it's going to be 3 cosine. And then you will take 2 as a common factor. So it's going to be 2 x, and then you will divide by 2, plus pi over 4. And then minus 2. So by doing that, we know that amplitude, the absolute value of the amplitude, of course, is going to be absolute value of 3, which is 3. Then we need to find number 2, the equation, which is y equal k. K is negative 2. From there, we can tell the max and the minimum, which is going to be equal y plus a, y minus a. So negative 2 plus the 3 is 1. Negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5. Okay. Then we're going to move on to find 3, the phase shift, which is h equal negative pi over 4. That's going to be my first angle, remember? Next, we need to find the period, which is 2 pi over b, and b in this case is 2, that's pi. Finally, before the table is going to be dividing the the period, by 4. We are going to skip count by that number, and then we will draw the table. So the table will be xy. We're going to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, starting from the h, and skip count by this number here. Skip count by pi over 4, that's going to be 0, pi over 4, and then one more, plus pi over 4 is pi over 2, plus pi over 4 is 3 pi over 4. Now, are we going to take the same thing as the sine, axis max, axis minimum, axis? That's sine. Negative cosine is going to be this one, axis minimum, axis maximum, axis. Of course, no, because cosine shape is different. So let's look at the cosine function. Cosine function basically is this one here. It starts from the maximum, axis, minimum, axis, and maximum. That's the pattern. So the pattern again, axis, then max, then axis, then minimum, axis, and max. So that's my pattern. One more time, max, axis, minimum, axis, and max. And now we are going to go, we are choosing between these points here, guys. So let's try. Axis is negative, max is 1, and we are ending it with max as well. Then axis negative 2 and negative 2, minimum is negative 5. That's my pattern. We are going to use it to draw here. So we are going to start with negative pi over 4. Negative pi over 4 is going to be here, then 0, pi over 4, pi over 2, and 3 pi over 4. So we know that negative pi over 4 will go with 1. Then 0 with negative 2. Pi over 4 with negative 5. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's here. I'm going to erase the rest. Just do it. then we are going to go with pi over 2 and negative 2. So negative 2 again, that's my axis basically. So if I draw the axis here, it's going to be here, right? And finally, the maximum, which is 1. So let's try to match between these points. So I'm going to go curve. Oh. Of course, when you draw on a paper, it's way easier than this one and more accurate, basically. That's not a good one. Okay, kind of. And then you can repeat this pattern. So if you want to repeat it, you go again, max axis, minimum axis, max. So max, so we have 1, and then negative 2, and then negative 5, negative 2, and 1, and you can match. And you can continue to the right side, and then you do the same on the left side as well. So on the left side, you can go backward, which is going to be 1, negative 2, negative 5, negative 2, and 1. So you can go this way now. So 1, negative 2, negative 5, 1, negative 2, and then 1. And then again, you can match between these points. And again, I'm sorry that this is not accurate. Okay, and you can continue. Now, thinking about the domain and range, we know that the domain is going to be all real numbers as well. But the range is going to be same as before, minimum, which is negative 5, comma, maximum, which is 1. Now this question here is the same thing. I'm going to first move the 1 to the other side. That's going to be k, and then taking 4 as a common factor. So when you take 4 as a common factor, you will divide by 4. So let's do the a first. A is basically the absolute value of negative 2, which is 2. Number 2, the axis is going to be 1. From there, you can tell the max is going to be 1 plus 2. Minimum will be 1 minus 2. Then we move from there into step number 3 is the phase shift, which is h equal, you divide by 4, right? 3 pi over 4, you take the opposite sign. Then you have the period, which is 2 pi over b, that's pi over 2. And then you divide the period by 4, which is pi over 2 over 4, that's pi over 8. And then you create the table. So that's x and that's y. And I need, remember, I need 5 points, 5 angles. First angle, as usual, will be h, 3 pi over 4. And then you skip count by pi over 8. So you will add pi over 8 each time. And when you add pi over 2 here, it will be pi over 8, it will be 3 is 7. 7 pi over 8. And then plus pi over 8 will be pi. And then plus pi over 8 will be 9 pi over 8. And again, plus pi over 8 will be 5 pi over 4. Now, which pattern we are going to use? Well, in this case, I have negative cosine. So a negative cosine function, remember, this is cosine, which is max, axis, minimum, axis, and max, that's cosine. Sine, negative cosine is going to be basically the reflection about x-axis. That's negative cosine, which is minimum instead of maximum. Axis is going to be the same. Max instead of minimum, axis, and minimum. So the pattern will be minimum, axis, max, axis, and minimum. Okay, so that's the pattern that we are going to use here. So we're not using the red one, we're using the green one. So let's find the axis. It's 1, 1, 1. Minimum is basically -1 and ends up with -1. Finally, the max is here. By drawing this, we want 3 pi over 4. That's 3 pi over 4, then 7 pi over 4, then pi, 9 pi over 8, and 5 pi over 4. So we'll start with this one and -1, and then 7 pi over 8 and 1, pi and 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, and then -1. And then you match between points, these points. And then you are going to repeat this pattern. So let's repeat. So one more time, -1, then 1, then 3, then 1 again, then -1. And again, you match between these points. And you can continue the same. The other side, you go backward. So -1, and then 1, and then 3, and then 1 again, and then -1. So you match between these points. It's going to be here. And then you can continue one more time. -1, 1, 3, 1, and -1. And again, you match. And so on. Domain is all real numbers. Range will be from the minimum point, which is -1, all the way to the maximum point, which is 3. So that's everything, guys. Let me know if you have any question, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.